Hello, state of the school, Frank's School, Camp Ranch campus, but I'm on my travels now. This is the 50th video in this series. And I said I was going to be fast about these trips, the travels. I am. Uh, I spoke already about the trips I took. I think I called that pre-Peace Corps. I want to go back and correct a couple things. It was Fort Lauderdale, of course, where Lee lived. How we got down there the first time was in a Chevy Nova, 1964 maybe, something like that. No, it was older than that. That my parents owned. It was my parents' car. We drove down and back. The second trip I made, we rented a car, and that was a much harder trip. Um, uh, I don't know if there's anything else to say about that first one. I just remembered some things. My hitchhiking across the U.S. Uh, I wanted to say that actually coming back, finally by Albany, New York, I took a bus. I took a bus to Boston. Now I lived in New Hampshire with my parents at that time, but I took a bus to Boston. I took a bus then from Boston up into the state of Maine. I don't remember exactly what was the town that I took the bus to, but I know what my destination was. My destination was to see my girlfriend, who lived who at that time was at a summer school called Haystack in Maine. You probably haven't heard of it, but it's a summer school for artists and craftsmen. And she was there with her mother, Flo, and they picked me up. I think I took a bus as close as I could get in, and I hitchhiked, and then finally, I don't know how I found a way to call them. I must have found some way to call them from a phone booth, because this is way before there's such a thing as cell phones. But anyway, I made it. I wanted to see my girlfriend, whom I later married. I'm talking about Joyce. And Flo was her mother, a wonderful woman, my first mother-in-law. Well, after that, when I made it back there, we then took the car back to Concord, New Hampshire. But while I'm talking about Flo, and still before Peace Corps, there were twice that it's not quite pre-Peace Corps only, but there were twice that I went to Montreal. The one time I think I was 19, and I went with my father because he was working up there. He was up there for a weekend, and so that was my first into Canada. I haven't been to Canada very many times, and I could tell you stories about that, but they don't affect the Frank School really. Affected me to some extent, and then in the fall of 1967, it would have been. I don't know. You probably never heard of Expo '67. I think it was. Montreal put on a kind of a festival for the industry, whatever. Expo '67, and Flo wanted to see it, and we drove with her. And I know it was that year because Joyce and we weren't married yet, but Joyce and I rode with her up to Montreal, and a man from New Zealand went with us. I remembered, that's how I know it was when it was, because I took landscape architecture for 1 year at Harvard, just one course, but it was a full year. And it was in that course that I met this man from New Zealand, and when he heard that we were making a trip, he wanted to know if he could go. He was studying at Harvard as well, all the way from New Zealand. Joyce will remember that if she watches this video. All right, now, Peace Corps. The first trip I went and was in Africa. I was in Africa for a little over, not quite 2 months, full time, Senegal, Africa. And I flew there. Now that was true international travel there, I mean by plane. And now I lived there, living in Africa for that month or so. That was a whole other experience. And I'm not going to try to go into that now because I'm talking about my travels. So I could maybe regard that as a travel. I got to know the city of Dakar. But anyway, coming back, because I had 1 more year of college, and it was part of the idea. This Peace Corps training the idea was you went and stayed with some Peace Corps volunteers, and that was your training. And then you went back when you were ready at the end of your college year. You went back and took over what they were doing. I didn't go back. I didn't take over what they were doing, but I warned them. I wasn't so sure I was going to do that because I thought I was going to get married and my wife would have to train as well. And but on the way back, I came through Europe. I had a ticket from Senegal to Boston, I think, and I routed that through Morocco, where I visited a friend, a foreign exchange student who'd stayed with my parents. That was the first of 2 times I was in Morocco. Then Lisbon, my first European city, my first stop in Europe at all. I loved it. That was Lisbon. And then on that trip, we stopped briefly in Madrid, I should say, Spain, Paris, and then back. It had to be quick because I had to get back to school. So there was that trip. And it is described elsewhere, which I'll tell you in a minute. Then I did go into Peace Corps then. Joyce and I did train, but once again, it was an experimental training. This was 68, and they basically sent us straight to Brazil. And there's where we finished off learning our Portuguese as we'd worked on before we even went. It was like skipping training altogether, something Trump might, if he would let Peace Corps survive. Anyway, and again, that we lived there 3 years, and that's a whole other, that could be a book, I suppose, but that's not my purpose here. It's travels. And so I'll disregard that as one trip back and forth to Rio de Janeiro several times, possibly 3-4 times. We got to know that city well as well. And but then after the first year, we had a vacation, and we traveled to Peru, up the Amazon to Peru, across Peru by land to Bolivia, by land back into Brazil, and back to Catalina de Rocha. Now, I describe those trips in detail. That's why I'm going so fast right now. And I've got to sort this out because I will give you the links, but it's going to take me a while to sort it out. 8 years ago, I did some videos called, it's actually a playlist called Portugal and the Alps Prequels playlist. And I'll give you the link for it. There are 8 videos in which I describe that. Then I also give a bunch of videos called Portugal and the Alps. Those are prequels, I guess. Anyway, that was 8 years ago too. I didn't put them in a playlist, but I will. And then finally, only 4 years ago, a whole long series of videos called Virtual Travel, later VT, in which I describe a sort of a similar route in great detail, but it's not one I actually made. It was virtual, and I'll tell you about that later. I'm going fast, and I've got some sorting out to do, but that'll do it for today. Bye.